Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jason Jensen and you're watching Jason Jensen Trains. In today's episode, I am going to go over the basic steps in putting together a wood structure kit. We will go over prepping the walls and then bracing the walls. These are basic steps that need to be taken when putting together any wood structure kit. So let's head over to the workbench and get started. So today we're going to be working on this structure right here. We'll get to the dock later. That'll probably be a separate video. Today we are just discussing bracing and prepping the walls for a wood structure kit. So the first thing I do with the kit is lay out my pieces. And then I try to lay them out the way that they are going to fit together. So in this kit, the front wall is board and batten. And it's a little thin, a little flimsy, so they provide a piece of wood that goes on the back of it. There's only one way that it fits. If you glue it this way, you can see that there's extra wood. If you turn it this way, then it fits perfectly. So the first thing we're going to do is glue these two pieces together. We're using full strength Elmer's glue. And what I like to do is spread the glue out all the way to the edges. I have a little bit of water here. I can get my finger wet. Make sure that it's lined up perfectly. Now we will set that aside and let that dry. And we will put some weights on it. Okay, next we're going to move on to bracing the walls. This kit did come with instructions. I'm just going to go ahead and brace it the way that I normally brace walls. So, but definitely it should have a template that you can follow. Most kits do have a bracing template that you can follow. We're using 1/8 inch thick wood. This is basswood. This wall here will get three strips glued on it. Now, I have had people send me messages before that tell me they have completely braced their walls, and when they went to paint them or stain them, they still warped. I'm going to show you a couple tricks to help you avoid that. The first trick is to find out on your wood which way the grain goes. And you can simply do that by bending it and seeing which way is harder to bend. So it's harder to bend this way than this way. So for the example, I am going to draw lines on this side. That is which way, that shows which way the grain goes. Because it's much easier to bend this way than it is this way. So your lines go on this side where it's easier to bend. Now those lines would get glued down to the wood. And these strips here that I've already cut, we'll see so seems like it's easier to bend that way than this way. So we'll make sure that the grain is glued down. Hopefully that makes sense. And I'll go over it again with the other pieces. Next, when you put your glue on, take your finger or a paintbrush and spread it out evenly. Now the piece that we're gluing in the center, you'll notice I left room at the top because we're going to put a beam across there to support our roof card. So again, you're going to want to see which way your grain goes. So it's easier to bend this way, and this direction it doesn't bend at all. So because it's easier to bend that way, we'll put our line on there, and that line will get glued down to the wood. So I will show you an example why I spread my glue out and have it evenly spread over it. So yesterday I took 2 pieces of wood and I used thick wood just for the example. And what I did was I put a line of glue right down the center of it. I stopped 1/8 of an inch from each end with the glue and just put it right down the center. Then I put the 2 pieces of wood together and squeezed it as hard as I could. And some glue seeped out the sides, and I wiped it and I set it to the side to dry. And today I look at the piece and it looks as if the 2 pieces are glued together solid. And you can see that it just slides right in. So the ends curled up slightly because there was not any glue there. Then if you were to take a brush, I'm just going to dip it in water, But if you were putting a stain or a paint over this, that corner and this corner that aren't glued down are going to bow up even more. So as soon as that gets moisture on it, the ends will curl up a little bit. And you may not, just by looking at the model, you may not notice this, but when you go to photograph it, that will really show up in the photograph. And since I photograph all of my work for Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, I want to make sure that all of my stuff is glued together properly without any warping or ends curling up. Now this is a pretty thick piece, but on a thinner piece of wood or a small thin strip, like what you would use maybe for trim or rafter tails, when gluing these together, it's going to be more extreme. The ends will definitely curl up on you or warp if it's not properly glued. So let's finish gluing our bracing on. On your ends, you want to make sure that it is completely flush. If any glue does seep out and dry, you can simply take a file and run the file over it until it's completely smooth. Next, we'll work on the side wall. So on the side walls, for your bracing, you're going to want to come in 1/8 of an inch. So take a extra piece of wood and lay it there, and then we'll glue this one right next to it. So we'll take our extra piece, put it right on the edge, and then take our piece with the glue and put it right next to it. And then we'll wipe this just to make sure there's no extra glue. So most of the time you want your bracing to go from the very bottom to the top, unless the instructions tell you something different. By making it go from the top to the bottom, you will avoid any warping. I used to leave a little bit at the top and I would have the top two boards. Oh, this one we got to come in. We got to do the same on this side. 1/8 of an inch, then put it on there. So back to what I was saying, if you cut it off and leave it shorter, you run the risk of your top board or top two clapboards bowing slightly when you go to stain them or paint them. Now again, if you want, you can, sorry for my arm, you can flip these over and add weights to them. It's not necessary, but I am going to put some bracing on this wall too. Bracing is so important to prevent walls from warping. Acrylic paint, which most modelers use, like this paint here, is water-based. Acrylic paint is water-based. So when you paint this, you're getting the wood wet. And when wood gets wet, it tends to warp. So again, we're going to put that right to the edge. So like I had mentioned, to make sure that your glue is evenly spread over the full length of the board. This is just an extra precaution to make sure that no warping occurs. Now, because we've added those there, we're going to have to change our wall, because as you can see, so we are going to try this again. Sorry, that noise in the background is my furnace running. So that time, the mistake that I made was that not only did we have to come 1/8 of an inch in, but then we also had to allow for the thickness of that wood. The extra piece of wood that we put on the back of it. So again, we'll just make sure that this lines up. So in the beginning of this, I laid out my walls, and that is such a good idea to know how your walls assemble. For instance, this wall here, which is the back wall of the structure, the side wall doesn't go out to the edge, it goes in right there, because this is a little pop-out structure. So that piece fits in like that. Then you have this little wall that fits in there like that. Sorry, I'm in the way, I'm sure. So because of that, I put my bracing right there. So to figure out where to put that, I simply took a piece of paper, you can see where that little point is right there. So I marked it from that side to this side. And then put that at the bottom and made a mark. And then took a ruler and drew a line right there. And that told me where to put that piece. And because I had that piece glued on there, the next piece, I had to move it in 1/8 of an inch so that it will fit together perfectly. So I usually put my bracing where it's most needed. Like next to this door, this little piece that comes down here. I'm definitely going to want to put bracing there. And then here in the middle, in between those, in the end. So then on these pieces, you'll have to come 1/8 of an inch in and put your bracing. Same on this side. Because we have bracing on the edge of this, we'll have to come 1/8 of an inch in and move our bracing over just a little bit. Hopefully this is all making sense, and to some of the advanced modelers, you know this, but for people who are beginners, this is very, very, very important. And like I explained earlier with the grain of the wood, basswood, it's a little harder to tell the grain. With pine, you can definitely tell which way the grain is going. So I'll give you an example. If you were looking at your wall section from the end, and this was your wall, and then you take your, so you're looking at it from the end, and you glue your piece of bracing to it, just like we did on this one. So now we're gluing another piece on here. This would tend to warp and curve like this. Okay, so it would curve. If it was going to warp, it might curve that way. If your grain runs the same way, it's going to be easier for that piece to also curve. So by putting your grain going the opposite way, it's less likely for this piece to bow. Hopefully you can see that. So your piece of bracing, you don't want the grain to go with your siding, your clapboard siding, because you don't want both of them to bow. I really hope that makes sense. It's just it's not a must. You don't have to. Definitely just by gluing it and spreading the glue, no matter which way the grain is going, it's going to help it. But to ensure that it's not going to warp, that's just another trick that you can use. Another trick too then is, after this is all done and dried, completely dried, you can paint the inside of this wall a black color, a gray color, any color, you know, a dark brown, and that way when you put your stain over this side, it'll also help prevent the wall from warping. So here we have a little wall section that gets a door put in it. Now we're going to want to brace this so that when we go to paint it, that it doesn't completely warp. Something this thin is definitely, as soon as it gets a little bit of moisture on it, it's going to bow. It's going to bow like this. So we are going to brace the back side of it, sort of ignoring where the door is. So we'll mark it. We just simply marked it right there. We're making sure the piece of wood is completely covered in glue. Then we're just going to glue it on here. Now from the front side, where the door gets put in, you'll see there's extra wood. What we'll do later is we'll go with a sharp knife and carve that out after this is completely stained, painted, weathered. After we are all done, the last step will be to cut away that little extra wood. And we'll see, with the door, it might not even show. We might just put the door in and it might not show at all. But if it does, if there's a window and you can see that, we'll cut that little extra piece out. And we'll do the same up the other side. Now on the other side, there's a tab where it fits in to a wall. So we want to make sure that our bracing is in just a little bit. I will show you up close what this piece looks like as soon as I get it glued in place. We'll just take a piece of wood, run it along just to get our extra glue off of the tab. Same with the inside of the door frame. You're going to want to take a knife or a toothpick and you're going to want to get that extra glue out of the door frame. So you can see the tab on that side. We don't want to cover that up. But now that should prevent any warping from happening. And I'll show you how that fits. So that piece fits right in that wall section like that. Then our little wall, which we had weighted, we had put weights on it with the bracing so it could dry. That goes like that. And our back wall, which still needs one more piece of bracing on it, will go like that. So I'll show you inside of this. Because we put the bracing on this piece, which was most important, this was the most important piece to be braced because it was so thin, we moved that one over so that that could go in there. And then our trim will go right down the corner there. So as you can see, all of the bracing has been put on, and I have weights on all of the walls. I recommend weights just because, again, the moisture of the glue on the wood, even that little bit of moisture can start the warping process of the wood. So as you can see, all of our bracing is done, and this has been drying for hours, and it had the weights on it. I do recommend finding some weights. Anything that you can do to prevent warping later on, I definitely recommend. Even if you wanted to add more bracing, you can. I cut my own 1/8 inch strip wood on a table saw that I have. So yeah, you can definitely go in and add even more bracing if you want to. And you know, a simple trick you may have noticed when I was gluing these on, that when I'm working, I leave my glue bottle laying down flat. That way, instead of setting it up like this, then when you go, you have to wait until the glue all runs down to the tip for it to come out again. This way, just laying it flat, that glue is already staying down there, so you just tip it up and you're ready to go. Simple little trick. You probably also noticed I cut my wood with a saw like this. I think this is a very handy tool for cutting wood. Next, if you'd like, you can sort of dry fit all of your wall sections together. Just to make sure that they all fit nice. Everything lines up good. You don't want to paint your walls and then later find out that it's not fitting properly, or there's a slight warp in your wall and the trim doesn't quite line up. Better to see it now, where maybe you can fix it or do something about it. Okay, it looks like everything is fitting together. Okay, so the next step is to rough these up a little bit and maybe lift some boards. Some people do that first before they put bracing on. I tend to do it after all my bracing's done. And I will show you. You'll need some extra of the 1/8 inch thick wood that you used for your bracing, so that you can put it under it for support. So to lift some of the clapboards, I use a straight razor. And again, with your extra piece of wood, we're going to want to slide that so it's basically going to sit maybe like that underneath it. So you're just going to want to go underneath one of the boards, and then once you slide it under it, then you're just going to want to lift it up. So what you can do too is put a slit in one of the boards, and then slide your blade under that board and lift up the corner. Then you want to make sure that you also go the other direction, so we'll make another slit, and this time we'll go in from this direction and lift it. So that's really about it. If you want to add more wood grain or texture to it, I use a wire brush, and you can simply, with the direction of the clapboard, just drag it over it, and it's adding little lines, little grooves in it that will represent wood grain. They don't really show up now, but when you stain it, the stain will go inside all these little lines that you're creating in it. And really you want to do this before you lift your clapboards. You don't have to, but otherwise you run the risk of, it getting snagged on one of the boards you lifted and tearing it off. So just make sure you always go the direction of the clapboard. So really this step here has to be done to every wood structure that you put together. And if you really take your time and make sure that everything that I showed you is done really well, it's going to help you when you assemble the structure and paint it. You're going to make sure that your walls fit properly together, so that when you add your corner trim, if that wall is slightly bowed, when you add that corner trim in, it's going to show up. It's not going to fit in there perfectly square. And it might not show up maybe just looking at it, but definitely when you photograph it, you are going to see it. You are going to see that that is slightly bowed. I always recommend, if you want to become a better modeler, photograph your work and photograph it up close. The camera will catch every little flaw or mistake. The human eye in your brain, really your brain acts as a filter. So when you look at this structure, if that window was slightly crooked, you might not notice it, just because you see doors and windows in real life every day, and the majority are not crooked. They are straight up and down. So your brain tells you that it's straight. But the camera has no filter, and it will show you if it is slightly off. So again, if you want to become a really good modeler, I suggest photographing your work and photographing it up close. You can learn a lot from it. For example, I used to go a little quicker with my bracing and a little bit less, and my walls sometimes would slightly warp. Well, I didn't really notice it until I put the structure together, put my corner trim on. Let's just say this is your corner trim. And if your wall is slightly warped, it's going to stick out at the bottom a little bit and possibly at the top a little bit. And when you go to photograph that, that sticks out like a sore thumb. You'll see it and notice it right away. So, and in my older models, I did notice that. And so I've really worked at preventing that from happening again. So another tip to prevent warping is to paint the back of the walls with a color. You can use black, gray. I did a dark brown. This seals the back of it and helps with preventing any type of warping when you put your stain or paint on the front of it. This is the brown that I used. It's just acrylic paint. I recommend not dipping your brush in water while you do it. Just dip your brush into the paint and brush it on. Dip it back in, brush on some more, but don't get your brush wet, because that moisture may actually start it to warp. This is also good if you plan to put lights inside your structure. This seals the wall so that the light doesn't sort of illuminate the wall, or so that you don't see any light. I hope you enjoyed today's video. The steps I showed, I believe, are a key to the success in the outcome of your build. If you take your time and give as much care and detail as you do in painting, weathering, and detailing your structure, you will save a lot of trouble later on down the road. The structure will assemble very easily. You can paint it and weather it without worrying about it warping. So take your time and really focus on making sure that the steps you take in the beginning of your build are done correctly, so that later you can avoid any problems that may occur. I want to quick say thank you to everyone that's already subscribed to the channel. I love hearing from all of you, all of the comments and all of the suggestions. They're great. So thank you so much. Well, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and be sure to click on that bell to be notified when I upload more videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy modeling.